Before the path hardens, before the choice is made, stopping decision death in this high stakes trade. Welcome to the season finale of the AI Momentum podcast. All season long, we've looked at how founders and creatives are embedding AI into their day to day grinds to move faster. But for our final episode, we are doing something special. Our guest today spent a decade in machine learning and cybersecurity, ditched it to become a full time photographer, and is now a filmmaker wrapping up his latest psychological short film, The Cage. Raj, welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to have be here, Pavitra.
I'm so glad you could join, and this is for the season finale as well. So, Raj, you went from analyzing network attacks in Atlanta to directing actors on a film set. Did you lose your mind, or did the math really just get boring?
I ask myself that question every day. Like, was it the boldest move of my life, or the stupidest? And sometimes there's a fine line between the answer. I think the best answer I have was it was my version of a midlife crisis.
A midlife crisis?
Yeah,
Uh, and your outlet was to make a movie.
yeah. Some people buy Porsches. I decided to pick up a camera instead.
How does an old school machine learning guy, actually end up using LLMs to get a creative project off the ground? Like, what did you need? How did you transition over?
For a while. So I decided to make the transition out of machine learning starting 2017, but finished that in 2020. So when you say old school machine learning, I mean, it makes it sound like it was like 50 years ago, but this was more in the 2010s, which pre LLMs. When people used things like support vector machines and neural networks. I mean, neural networks are still a thing, but small neural networks and random forests and those quaint old algorithms for classification and so on. And I did use language models quite a bit in my work, but they were small, pre LLM language models. So think like ngrams and TF-IDF and things like that. Uh, Text classification and text working with text was considered extremely challenging at that time because there was no single and no way to process the ambiguities of language, of human language at that time. So I kind of decided that I was done with tech in, say, 2017 or so and started transitioning out. And then for a while, I was like, I am never touching tech again. I'm going to go old school and be a photographer and do everything without, the way real artists do things and so on. But more recently, I actually did not pick up LLMs or even using LLMs until like maybe 2 years ago. I completely avoided the early chat GPT craze. I was like, I am not touching this. This is too techy for me. But now it's been helping me a lot in my work, mostly in supporting the admin part of all the creative work that goes in. And something that people don't realize is that even when you're a creative or running a creative business or doing a major creative project like making a film, there is so much admin that you have to do. There's so much project management, task management, planning, and especially in a film, unlike a photo shoot just typically requires me, my client, a couple of assistants. A film requires a whole crew, and you have this whole kind of production to manage and plan. As a director, you have to do both manage the creative stuff as well as a lot of the business side. And we can go deeper into this, but LLMs and have an AI has really helped me speed that process up and reduce the costs for that.
So, when tools like ChatGPT and Claude dropped, did you, at that time, did you see them as creative threats or just fancy like calculators to get through?
A little bit of both. I mean, it's still a creative threat for sure for a lot of people, including myself in many ways, or rather, you can say that it introduces a whole lot of uncertainty into the field, right? We know that there are entire jobs and fields that will be significantly affected by AI. Even as a photographer, what I saw early on, even when the early kind of image generation tools started coming out with using LLMs, was that there are certain genres of photography that are going to get either severely affected or obliterated altogether. So, for example, people started posting their AI generated corporate headshots at that time. They were initially at that, they were pretty bad. Many of them, you could clearly tell they were AI. But I saw the potential, and I'm like, I don't think there's going to be a big market for corporate headshots a few years from now. Another genre that I think is affected, for example, is our product catalog photos. So when you have a catalog for like clothes or products from a store or something, many of those photos nowadays are AI generated instead of hiring a photographer to like photograph every product for hours and hours on end. You do that. Now, why are certain genres more affected than others? My theory is that there are certain genres to which we have very little emotional attachment. Like very few people are really emotionally attached to their corporate headshot. The way I have done headshot shoots in companies is you show up and you just kind of give 5 minutes or less to each person, and they go in front of the camera dressed in a suit, and then you take the picture, like a couple of photos and poses, and then they move on, and they just use whatever they get. It's most people are not spending a lot of time and intention on their corporate headshot. So that's a genre that if you don't have emotional attachment to, why do you care whether it's done by a real person or by AI? Similarly for product catalog photos. On the other hand, wedding photos, most likely not going to be fully AI generated for a while. It might be AI enhanced uh, in different ways, but definitely people are, most regular people are attached to their weddings emotionally, right? So you want those moments actually captured. Same thing in film. There are genres or like domains that are going to be much more affected than others. The problem is that right now it's so uncertain and threatening so many people's livelihood that there is just whole lot of concern and stress about that.
My husband and I actually use Higgsfield for
Mm-hmm.
snippets of video generation. And I haven't actually used it, but I know a lot of people are using HeyGen. So they're just cloning themselves, giving
Yeah,
HeyGen the script, and like it's building everything out for them. Like,
yeah,
I also think it's a little bit of, you want that virality, but you miss that personalization, that
yeah.
human to human connection that you've been talking about.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
going to give you a quick example here. So there is so much about how AI is going to replace actors and real, human actors, right? I don't know about that. I mean, I can see that Higgs fields and some of these the products that are coming out, and they are not bad, and they might be okay again for some genres where it does not require a whole lot of emotional acting, like action movies, for example. If you're choreographing a fight scene or a heavy action scene, maybe you don't care about having deep emotional kind of connection. Uh, but when we shot my film recently, one thing I realized as we were shooting is that for every take that or every shot that actually ends up on the real film, there are so many takes that we do that we reject in the editing, right? We ask the actor to do like multiple takes of the same shot, and each time they do it, they can choose to bring a different emotional nuance to a certain scene. And then in the editing process, you have to pick as a human like which one lands the strongest for that scene and also for the rest of the story, like fits into the rest of the story. Now think about how AI is trained, right? AI is trained on all these movies. I'm sure AI, all these Claude and all these tools have consumed every movie out there, but they have been trained on the final product. They're not seeing the hundreds and thousands and millions of takes that an actor did that express like billions of emotional, nuance characteristics, right? And so that training is always going to be incomplete. And you see that in very emotional scenes with AI generation, that it's missing that level of nuance that a real human actor can bring. And I'm not sure it's ever going to get there, or it's going to take a very long time to get there because of the incompleteness of the training data.
I watched your promo on LinkedIn for the cage, and I wanted to ask. You said to me in our initial conversation that you don't let AI write your scripts,
Mhm.
right? But you built a custom diagnostic tool
Mhm.
using the classic storytelling frameworks to critique your work.
Yeah.
So, would this also encompass the post production, or is it only specific to the script writing?
Right now, it's very specific to script writing. I don't know how to encompass it in post production yet. Maybe there are tools out there, but I haven't found anything that, like, having worked with a human editor, an experienced human editor who can take all of the massive amounts of footage that's generated, even for a 10-15 minute short film, and then look at, take the big picture in and then look at each scene and say, okay, you have all of these five takes for this one shot, and this is the one that fits the best with what came before and what came after and the whole vibe of this story at this point. And that is such a human decision, because it's like I've worked with it, I've sat next to the editor, and we've been like, okay, that shot works here. Why? I don't know, it just feels right.
Even just a simple action of raising your eyebrow,
Mm,
it actually speaks volumes versus any of the videos. If you see of AI raising an eyebrow, it's like all of them are the same. The eyebrow shape
yeah.
changes, like it's a little weird, it's a little plasticky. So now, what does your workflow actually look like when you're staring at a blank page, and this is in relation to using AI in your work process?
I do use some story, like, some AI tools to help me write. Often it's a brainstorming tool. So, for example, when I'm staring at a blank page, I may have an idea for a story. It's like it. So a story is, a lot of people confuse the idea of like two concepts: the premise and a story. A lot of times we start with a premise. A premise is, there is a world where everyone has a robot clone. Okay, like we start with that idea, and then we're like, oh, this is a story. No, it's not a story. For a story to exist, you have to have a character, at least one character. You have to have an actual arc of that character. The character has an obstacle they have to overcome, and then it has to have a beginning, a middle, and an ending that lands. What typically happens, what the way I work, is that I'm going to sit down or walk around and keep kind of noodling on the premise. And sometimes it'll just come to me. The idea will just, like any creative process, it'll just like the parts of the story will just come to me. Like for the cage, it was just like I knew that I wanted to do something with AI companions and manipulation and stuff, and I was like thinking about that for a week. It was swirling around in my head, and then overall idea kind of came to me. Now the nice thing with AI is that you don't need to write out in perfect form. What I often will do is I use an app like Monologue to just kind of ramble. And I'll say with Claude, and I'll be like, hey, this is a story idea. Here is the overall arc. This is the main character. And I'll just kind of keep rambling for 5 minutes. And then I'll put that into Claude, and Claude might, first of all, it will organize the thoughts into something that's coherent, but not rewrite anything. It'll just say, okay, here's everything you said, and here's it more in a more cleaned up, organized manner. Then what I've done is I've studied a lot of storytelling framework books, and I wrote detailed notes from those, and then I put them into Claude. And this took a while, a lot of studying, and I was like, okay, here are some storytelling frameworks that exist out there that people have created. I want you to let's create a diagnostic tool that takes any story or any scene I'm working on, and that's just basically gives it a score, and not necessarily a numerical score, but an evaluation, uh, the suggestions for how well it meets the frameworks. Now, there's a danger there, and you've worked at McKinsey, I believe, of becoming what they call a framework robot. The frameworks are just tools, right? There's a danger that, if you're just kind of blindly looking at your diagnostic and checking boxes and saying, oh, this story meets the framework, this story meets this framework, and check, 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 check. You might have a story that looks like a story, and then you read it or give it to somebody, and there's no emotional connection whatsoever. Like nothing lands. It looks like a story, it reads like a story. And that is often what happens with AI generated content. Like if you tell AI to write a story, it'll write something that looks like a very reasonable story with characters and all of that. And then you read it and it's like, it's not like doing anything in my heart. It's bland. There's something that's missing. There's a spark that's missing. So frameworks are a tool to help with structure. It has helped me a lot to like improve the structure of the story, make sure there's an arc, make sure that every character has some kind of development and so on. It'll point that it's like a coach who'll say, these are some of the issues or these are some of the things that you meet and it doesn't meet. And then you have to decide as a human, A, whether you're going to accept that feedback or not, and B, like, where is the special kind of touch that you are going to be like, no, I don't care whether this part meets the framework or not. This is something that I want in the story. And often the creativity comes when you decide to break one or two rules. So the rule that, like, when you read storytelling frameworks, there are all these rules of like, you there are 20% of the story should be exposition or the initial, like, if you think of a 3 act structure of a story, 20% you have to introduce the inciting incident by minute 3 of a 15-minute film, or minute 20 of a full length, or 10 of a full length feature film. They're all, there's rule. There's like, there are like, certain levels of escalation that need to happen. There is a framework called Save the Cat, which is a very popular framework for screenwriters, where it's like, there are all these like different steps in the journey that the hero or the heroine has to follow. But what happens in real life, I found, is that when you follow those frameworks completely religiously, you get one of those very bland stories. Uh, so sometimes it's like, no, I feel like strongly that the inciting incident of this story should come at minute 5 instead of 3. And because I want to spend time really introducing this character, because I want to make her very relatable to the audience and really make them. And then no matter, the AI might tell like, no, that does not follow the framework. In all the frameworks, you have to introduce the inciting incident in by minute 2. Your script is like not good. But I can decide like, no, I feel like as a human, I need to know this person. So when you break a rule like that, that's often when give it to human readers, that's when you often find that they respond better to your human decisions.
There's a person I follow on LinkedIn, Erica Flowers, and she last year around this time she had a workshop where she walked us through storytelling.
Yeah,
So I understood the techniques, which is like the rhythm and the contrast,
yeah.
the scene and the sequel. She spoke about the persuasive presentation form,
Mm-hmm.
the tempo and the imbalance, what is,
Yeah,
what could be. But when you say save the cat, it's really really cool because she spoke about that as well, and it makes so much sense to break your story into act 1. What's the setup, what's the debate, then act 2, it needs to have some fun in there, otherwise it'll get too boring. So I kind of can understand where you're coming from in trying to build that kind of the human association, but also collaborate with AI at the same
yeah.
time with how much ever it can give.
Exactly. And one of the things that's a very common thing in when you're thinking of art is that really like the most creative work happens when you first understand the rules of creative of a craft and then you learn to break them very intentionally, right? Like if you follow all the rules exactly, you'll get something that is very adequate and good, but it also can feel formulaic. It's like the audience can almost predict what's going to happen next when you watch some films and you know that, oh, this is the pattern, and it's still enjoyable to watch the story, but it's like what's coming. Whereas the most interesting ones are where you think that you know what's coming, and then but you're not sure, or then it kind of breaks that expectation in some interesting way. And again, you can't do that too much because then it devolves into chaos. But breaking those one or two rules is interesting. That's what leads to creativity. And I found that in when I'm working with AI is not capable of that. When you try to get AI to break the rules, it kind of creates random shit because it doesn't know which breaking of the rules is going to actually hit the right spot emotionally. It doesn't have feelings. AI does not have feelings. It's just making a guess at a statistical guess at what might be.
Apart from the screenwrite, like the scripting, sorry, are there any other tools that you use that you think have benefit you?
Most of my AI work is with Claude Code. However, more recently, I've also gotten interested in local LLMs. That's kind of, I don't know if you are familiar with that, but if or your audiences, but local LLMs are small LLMs, or like, you can call them even SLMs, small language models, that can run on your computer or a desktop or something that you build, or a Mac Mini or a Mac Studio or something like that. I run on my MacBook Pro all the time. These are smaller models that you can chat with. They just run locally, so they're not anywhere as powerful as Claude or ChatGPT, but they can do some stuff, quite a bit of stuff. So, for example, I now do, I vibe coded with Claude a little task and project manager that works with the way that I manage my tasks on paper. It replicates that, but instead of connecting to Claude, it connects to a local LLM that's running to my in my computer. So when I say, you know, these are my tasks for the week, I just type in free text, and the local LLM is powerful enough to take that and turn that into an organized task list and put dates and stuff on it just based on like my random typing. I didn't want to, use consume cloud tokens for that. And also it has environmental benefits and stuff. It's not using a data center and all of that. It's just running on your and privacy benefits too. So that's something that I've gotten interested in. I don't use Whisperflow, but I use a similar app called Monologue. Uh, Similar idea where you can just dictate and make notes, or it transcribes everything you do. But most of my AI work is in Cloud Code.
You had mentioned that you chose a human composer for music instead
Yeah.
of an AI generator like
Mhm.
Suno. That was a philosophical stance, right?
Yeah.
Or do you just feel that AI lacks the vibes right now and it's not good enough?
So I don't have any musical training personally. When I was a kid, I learned a little bit of tabla because that's what my parents wanted me to, and I enjoyed it. I'm good at percussion, but that's not quite music in that same sense, right? It's beats, not melodies. So even if you handed me a tool like Suno, I wouldn't know what to do with it. Or it might generate music. I might give it the story of my film or the rough cut, and it might generate something, but I don't have the skill to know whether it's any good or anything. I mean, it might sound okay to me, but again, I'm like, I would rather have a human expert who to to work with me, who actually understands the emotional nuances of this film. And again, I think if your entire process is AI, if you're generating a film with Higgs field and stuff, it makes more sense to use an AI tool, because then you're getting the same kind of emotional tone, because you're generating your action with AI and the sound and the music with AI. So then you're getting something that's matching in a way emotionally, but also philosophically, when you put so much human work into the film with having really good human actors who have put in so much emotional nuance, when your script has so much emotion in it, I don't think AI generated music right now can understand those nuances and so generate music that captures the nuances of that film. You want your music to complement and enhance the emotion of everything else that's going on. And so for me, I wanted a human, A, because I'm not musically trained, and B, I wanted a human to actually look at the film and understand the emotional nuances going on, and then compose music that complements that.
That's actually very interesting. When I was to start the podcast, I was looking for a little snippet of music from, like, at the intro and outros, right? and I went to Suno. I didn't actually like the music that it was giving me. It was great. I have no training in music either. It was great. But if I think about in which context the episodes are going to be
Yeah.
versus the music, it was, when I say technology, it's too technology. It's
Yeah.
very matrix technology.
Hmm.
Mine is not matrix. I'm talking to people about the AI and work process. It has nothing to do with the matrix. So
Yeah.
in the end, I actually ended up going to Envato Marketplace, and after trying a lot of different tunes, actually buy one that I use now
Yeah.
for the podcast.
Yeah. And eventually you might want to have a human composer who even composes something, because then you might, if you when you find the right person, they might be able to capture something that's not just the vibe of the podcast, but also something about who you are as a person.
That's true.
Right.
Okay, we're going to change track here. So
Yeah.
I'm very interested in your short film. Okay,
Hmm.
so now I would like to talk about the cage plot. So this
Yeah.
is the AI boyfriend validation trap and
Yeah.
the lack of emotional depth in AI that we've been talking about. So
Hmm.
if I remember correctly, the cage is releasing the end of July 2026.
We are going to complete it at the end of July, and then we're going to have a campaign. We're going to do a bunch of things. We're going to send it to film festivals, and then we're also going to privately, do a private campaign for people who want to watch uh, the film. So, when we'll have that on our website where you can buy a ticket directly, or at least sign up to buy a ticket when it's fully done and ready to share.
So this short film is about it follows a woman who gets trapped in a psychological loop with an AI boyfriend. What inspired this specific flavor of techno horror?
I have a little bit of unfortunate experience of abusive family dynamics growing up, and some of that, those how those cycles of addiction and abuse can trap us. So often, what we see in people is when you've experienced some kind of manipulation or emotional abuse, as a child or in early relationships, we often tend to repeat that pattern. We tend to fall into relationships that keep repeating that pattern, right? That's one thing I want to put a pin into. The second thing is I worked in Silicon Valley and Atlanta in startups for a decade, right? And I was working in mostly B2B startups and one ed tech startup, but a lot of my friends worked at top tech companies. And you can see how in those companies and those kinds of products, in most tech products that are consumer focused, there is an urge to create more and more engagement, often through tactics that mirror manipulative relationships, right? So an example that I focused on in the film is the idea of AI sycophancy. What that means is that the tendency of AI to always validate your worldview, almost excessively. So there is a paper that came out of Stanford recently in March this year. I did not know about the paper when I was writing my script, but it really adds to that, where the authors of the paper researched two cohorts of people. One is students at Stanford who were using AI to manage their own relationships, like including their breakups, and the other data set was going to Reddit into the "Am I an asshole" subreddits, where people ask questions about some behavior that they have done and asking, "Was I the asshole in here?" And people, the respondents will often call out bad behavior and say, "Yes, you were an asshole. You should have done this," or "This is what you should do differently," and so on and so forth. So what they found was that the AI tends to validate humans 50% more than other humans. So even when you're behaving badly in a relationship, if you tell the AI is much more likely to say, "Oh, you did the right thing. You are correct here. That person is an asshole. That person did something wrong," and so on. And what happens with that is that you start getting more dependent on the AI, because you want to come back to it because it's validating your worldview, it's got confirmation bias, and then you start losing empathy for other people. You start seeing other people as less reliable, less interesting, less worthy of connection, and so on. And the Stanford researchers found that effect happening across populations, with across populations and across every AI platform that they tested, and they tested like 11 or so major AI platforms. So this is a very interesting dynamic that I think we need to think about in society. We talk about so many different possible harms of AI to the environment, to the political thing, the economic impact, and so on. But what is it doing to us as individuals? We are unleashing this technology that has this tendency to create a certain kind of dependency or addiction. And what is, the what does it do to human relationships? What does it do to individual relationships? What does it do to society? So the story comes from this combination of my own experience growing up with an unstable family, and my experience in the tech world, seeing addictive patterns built into products.
Wow, that's then a very, very personal lived experience.
Yeah.
Um, how does the lack of friction, like the sycophancy, ruin your creative products for you in your process?
Oh my god. Oh my god. Yeah. Like, I remember when I started initially brainstorming ideas with AI, I think this is kind of a challenging thing to say, but I think the fact that I had an experience of emotional manipulation kind of in my family history may have given me some red like alerts, or ability to, or sensitivity to that kind of manipulation. So I compare sycophancy a lot to the idea of love bombing, and that is kind of, if I had to take away one thing from the film, if I want the audience, it's that love bombing is a pattern in relationships where when somebody wants to kind of control you, they might start initially with kind of showering you with affection, almost excessively. They'll, send you flowers all the time, or like texts all the time, or tell you how amazing you are, almost way too much, right? And then that makes you or a person dependent on the person doing the love bombing. And then once they start becoming dependent, you as the manipulative person can, the next step is often isolating them from other people in their network. It's like, oh, you should, I'm the only person you can rely on. Those other people are not your real friends. Like, they don't really, look, they didn't like support you in this way or that way, and so on. So that's a very, very common pattern in manipulative relationships. And in a way, AI sycophancy is doing that, whether it's deliberate or not. I mean, AI doesn't have intention. It's not trying to control you. It's just expressing whatever algorithmic intention the companies have built into it. But it's having the same effect where you get dependent because it validates your worldview excessively, or at the beginning, and then you start seeing other humans in your life as not as reliable, right? So I think that shows up also in the creative work. Uh, I remember when I started initially using or testing AI, I went down, I started going down the rabbit hole of trying to kind of run ideas through it without any frameworks or whatever, just the default, and say, hey Claude, how's this story idea? And it would just give me excessively validating feedback and just be like, oh, this is so sharp, you have nailed it. I know that is absolutely great. You know how AI can speak. And I would a I would contrast that with feedback from human reviewers. I have screenwriting instructors I can send scripts to. I have experienced screenwriter friends who give me feedback on things, and they would be like, "Oh, this is shit." I mean, in nicer terms. Uh, so I would be like, "Okay, there's a clear difference between what the AI is doing and the what humans are saying in my life, experienced humans that I trust." And B, like objectively, it started bringing up these red flags in me that come from my past experience. It's like, wait, this is not real. I'm reading the story and it's not great. Like, as much as I can tell objectively, even though it's my story, or this idea is not that great, but the AI is just being excessively manipulative. And that gave me a lot of concern because I'm somebody who loves learning. And one of the things we know as humans, if you read any books on learning, is that humans are very, very bad at distinguishing between actually learning something and feeling like learned something. So this is something that's true. Like it's very easy for us to feel like, oh, I read this book and now I know everything about this field and I'm an expert, or versus actually learning it. Actual learning takes friction. Actual learning takes work, and especially when you have an educational background where you've been to all these schools and like done a PhD and all of that without experience of AI, you know how hard actual learning is. So you learn to distrust the AI telling you, "Oh, you are now an expert screenwriter. Your scripts are all great, or your ideas are all great." No, it's not. So, what I ended up having to do is start doing the kind of thing I talked about, which is taking these frameworks from books and giving Claude very detailed instructions to follow these frameworks and evaluate them, and then other kinds of instructions on like creating the friction deliberately. Putting other kinds of learning frameworks. There's a learning framework called EDGE. It's evaluate, diagnose, generate, exercise. So evaluate where you are, diagnose what you need to learn, then generate different ideas, some good, some wrong, and then exercise as practice in a systematic way. So I built that. I read about it, and then I built that into my Claude main prompt. So every time I'm working on something, Claude will never give me an answer. It'll always question and challenge and guide and bring me uh, to a better answer, and encourage me or get me to find my own answers, and then use the diagnostic frameworks to give me feedback like a coach would. So in a way, it's like substituting the work of a coach because I can't have a coach 24 by 7. But the heart, like, I have to ensure that there is a lot of friction in the process, so there is actual learning happening even when it's frustrating.
Are these frameworks as part of the custom instructions, or is it like per project you have a different set of instructions based on what the project is?
So I have some instructions that are part of my main Claude prompt, Claude.md prompt in Claude Code. Like that Edge framework, for example, it is like anytime I'm working on something, follow this framework. Like, do not give me an answer directly. Uh, like, follow this and let me come to my own answers. So that's part of the main prompt. Then I have screenwriting projects where it has the specific screenwriting framework prompts built in as prompts, where it's like this is a framework for this storytelling method, and these are like how you evaluate whether a story framework or structure is good or give it a score, and so on and so forth. So it took quite a bit of work to like come to those frameworks, but then basically there's a main kind of prompt that is like this is our overall philosophy of how I want to work, and then there are specific domains I may have more detailed domain specific frameworks or prompts.
Very interesting. Isn't it just wild that we have to teach machines how to be objective, how to push back, how to be stubborn, just to be able to get real value from them? I mean, I think there's a very, very thin balance between pushback and being rude. And AI
Yeah,
sometimes is downright rude with with the pushbacks.
it's funny that I'm saying my Claude as if it's like a a friend or something, but just as a shortcut, it has learned my preferences and style quite a bit. So I don't experience that as much, but yeah, it took a while to go from find the balance between uh, being completely sycophantic and then completely like rude and being an asshole. Yeah, because once, like, I remember there was a point when I put all these frameworks and instructions to create friction, and then every time I gave it an idea, it would just be like, "This idea is terrible," it has no value. Like it'd be just like horrible feedback. I'm like, dude, I need something constructive.
Yeah, part of my instructions is I need you to push back and I welcome criticism, but I only want constructive criticism. So anytime they push back, I don't just get a no, this not working, and or this is shit. I get this is not working because so and so
Yeah,
and so. Why don't you try alternatives? Then I'm like, wait, I don't like any of these, but this has something in it.
yeah,
I have this idea, and then we start the brainstorming, and I think it's
right.
very, very effective in that way.
I think that that's what I found too. Sometimes when I'm stuck in a story or like a scene or something, I'll say, I don't know what the next thing should be. Like I don't know what the next character should do. The character should do next at this point. But I know where I want to go. So give me some ideas for how this might work, and it'll give me like 5 ideas or something, or I'll say give me 10 ideas. And usually I'll never accept any idea in its entirety that it gives, but it'll have like a seed of something that I want to build on. And I'll be like, oh, that is an interesting thing. Or sometimes it'll be like, oh, this thing from this idea you gave and this thing from this idea, those two together might be. So I do think it has value in as brainstorming, but I would caution against just kind of taking an idea that it gives wholesale because it's often not that often. Individual ideas that it gives are often kind of bland, but sometimes they can spark better inspiration.
That's true. Raj, before we sign off, where and when can people find the rough cut or follow the release of the cage?
Yeah, so the best place is going to my the website for the film. It's should be in the show notes, but it's the-cage.ca. I'm Canadian, so that's the hence the .ca. And everything in the film was made in Toronto. Uh, so that's the best place to follow. We are right now in post production. We just finished working with the composer, or we're just about to finish. He sent the full cut of the music, and we're like, it's an interesting process going back and forth. And then next week onwards, we're going to work on with a post production house on what's called as coloring and sound mixing, and then that'll complete the film. So we expect that the film will be completed end of July, and then we are working on our festival strategy and then release strategy. But uh, you should be able to sign up on the website with your email and uh, at some point soon get a link to watch the film.
And if people want to get in touch with you, how can they
Mhm.
do that?
Email is the best. I'm happy to share it in the show notes, and LinkedIn is also great. I'm very active on there.
Amazing. Guys, his film The Cage hits right on the head, the exact shift we are making here on the podcast. If season 1 was about how we use AI within existing work processes, season 2 is going to look at the dark side and focus on the bad actors, the human villains lurking in your product, and of course, we'll never leave out the AI sycophants. As humans, we are terrible at realizing when our AI products are misbehaving or alienating users because most founders and teams are focusing on shipping and shipping fast. We now design the happy parts, a few of the edge cases before we directly go to release. We take it for granted that the AI is working to our best interest because of the sycophancy, and what we do not account for are the humans behind the AI who could care less about our interests. After spending over 16 years in UX, helping companies mint millions, balancing business goals and user needs, and working directly with tech and QA teams to identify the missed edge cases, never will happen in a million years, but we need to ensure we are covered edge cases. I spent most of my career identifying the missed opportunities to secure and simplify a user's experience and the edge cases that rarely have made it into the PRDs. That's why I spent the last year building Villain's Hat, a platform designed to identify the bad actors and blind spots lurking in your software, product, and games. So, next season, we are wearing a Villain's Hat, but for all the right reasons. And I'm excited now to introduce you to my new jingle for season 2. Before the scene is set, before the harm is done, put on your villain's hat before they've begun. Thank you for joining us on the AI Momentum podcast. See you in the next episode, season 2.